Thank you for joining us today. My name is Molly Alawade, and I'm the Director of Education here at the American Kidney Fund. Before I turn the presentation over to today's speaker, I'd like to direct your attention to the control panel you should see on your screens. All participants are on mute, so we won't hear you, but we welcome your questions. If you have a question, please type it into the section of your control panel titled Questions. We'll see your questions and we'll do our best to answer them, either by replying to you in the questions box or out loud during the last several minutes of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing on our website, kidneyfund.org/webinars, within the next 1 to 2 weeks. For those of you in attendance who are health professionals, we are glad that you joined us today and hope you'll recommend this webinar to the patients you work with. However, as a friendly reminder, this webinar is not accredited for continuing education credits. If you believe that your accrediting body may offer you credit for attending this webinar, we'll be happy to send you a certificate of attendance after today's session. Simply email us at education@kidneyfund.org. Without further ado, allow me to introduce today's speaker, Jovonni R. Jovonni R is a public health strategist and thought leader with a deep passion for improving health equity across the lifespan through research, communication, multi-sector partnerships, and leadership coaching. She is known as a public health programming guru, using her skills to direct projects from concept to fully operational through program design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and breaking down silos across sectors. At the Food and Drug Administration, she is the lead for the Outreach and Communications team in the Office of Minority Health, overseeing the strategic direction of the team, advising senior officials on minority health, and leading the Diversity in Clinical Trials initiative. Prior to joining FDA, she managed national initiatives, including the Community Health Worker Health Disparities Initiative, which aims to reduce cardiovascular disease and asthma. Thank you, Jovonni, for joining us.
Thank you, Molly. I'm very excited to be here today to share about some of the work that my office, the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, is doing around raising diversity for clinical trials. So over the course of the next hour, I'll talk about minorities in clinical trials and why it matters to have diverse participation. I don't have anything to disclose. And some of the key points that I'll focus in on today are, what are FDA's role in clinical trials? So exactly what do we do around clinical trials? What is representation and what it means and how you can become more involved and engaged around raising awareness around diversity in clinical trials, and also talking specifically about some of the strategies that we're using to increase awareness around diverse participation. So just to give you a little bit of context, who is FDA and what do we do? So we are a regulatory agency. We are responsible for protecting the public's health, and we assure the safety and efficacy and security of not only human and veterinary drugs, but also for biological products, medical devices, food supply, cosmetics, and any products that may emit radiation, in addition to also having regulatory authority over the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of tobacco products. In my office, the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, our mission is to promote and protect the health of diverse populations, and we do that through 2 different ways. We have a research and collaborations program, and then we also have an outreach and communications program. I'm here representing the outreach and communications program and can provide a lot more detail about how we develop our multimedia materials to raise awareness around clinical trial participation. Ultimately, what we're aiming to do here is create a world where health equity is a reality for all, which really means that we're meeting people at their place of needs and removing barriers to having accessible health education materials and resources. As I mentioned, we have 2 different program areas, and I won't go into too much detail here, but this provides the comprehensive overview of everything that we're doing. But just keep in mind that we really do focus on managing a very broad research portfolio, and then also making sure we're developing health education materials and resources that are responsive to our diverse consumers' needs. We're making sure that we connect people with the agency. We want to make sure we have a bi-directional communication pipeline in place, because we definitely want to hear from our stakeholders about what are the important issues that we should be addressing as an agency and how we can best serve our consumers. In my office, we have a list of priority areas, and one of those priorities areas includes diabetes and kidney health. We do recognize that this is a major problem for racial and ethnic minority groups, so we want to make sure that we are focusing our efforts on providing some additional tools and strategies. So chronic kidney disease is a national public health problem that adversely impacts racial and ethnic minorities. And in my office, we're definitely committed to adding to the solutions. We want to make sure that the materials that we are putting out are useful, that they're translated into other languages, and that we have a variety of tools and resources that people can choose from in helping to make decisions about their health. Here's a snapshot of some of our most recent activities. For those who are in the local area and listen to the radio, last year we had a series of radio broadcasts through the National Institutes of Health, their Healthy Moments radio broadcast segment. So we had topics around automatic insulin dosing devices, how do you manage your diabetes, and also looking at what are the medication and device approvals. We've had different stakeholder meetings, as I mentioned before, to make sure that we are able to communicate with our stakeholders. We developed different educational materials, which could include fact sheets and brochures, for example. And then we have an active presence on social media, primarily through our Twitter account, where we will put out different health education messages throughout the year. And then also we have some partnerships with other organizations. Here's a sample of some of the kidney-related health research that has gone on, where either our FDA staff has participated in or sponsored the research over the last couple of years. And this is really just to showcase that we are using and implementing a variety of different strategies to improve kidney health. And one of those strategies is to conduct research. Within the research and collaboration program, our main goal here is to make sure that we are answering these specific minority health-focused research questions. We're adding to the amount of clinical trial data that is available on racial and ethnic minority populations, ultimately with the idea to help reduce health disparities and to promote scientific exchange and dialogue. Within the research and collaborations program, we do have a portfolio that includes both internal research and external research. We support improving the workforce diversity and making sure that we have different trainings and fellowships available. And most recently, we had a pharmacy student who actually worked on a project that was related to diabetes and food insecurity. And all of this work helps inform the amount of available data that we have on racial and ethnic minority groups, and also helps to inform future programming for our office. Again, this slide just shows another mechanism of how we're able to conduct research within the agency. And this slide actually shows some of our students who have actually gone out into the field and have been able to present on the work that they have done while working in our office. We have pharmacy students that come in throughout the year that will each address a specific research question. We have our summer student research program, and then we also have a summer science teachers program that focuses around food and nutrition. Another mechanism that we use internally is to have challenge grants to support research. And I'll just highlight one of the projects on here, the rapid message testing with consumer panels. This is a very unique project because it really allows us to engage with diverse consumers, because we're able to actually test our health education material to make sure that we are getting the message right, that our images resonate with the audience that we're trying to reach, and that we're using language that people understand. So this is really makes our product much better, because we're able to get input from others who will actually use the product. So within the outreach and communication program, we have two goals. One of our goals is to strengthen FDA's ability to outreach to racial and ethnic minority populations, underrepresented groups, and underserved populations as well. And we also focus in on those who experience low health literacy or may also speak English as a second language. Another goal of our program is to make sure that we are partnering with external stakeholders like AKF today by doing this webinar in the effort to stimulate dialogue, figure out how we can partner and synergize our efforts to produce better programs and materials, all with the hope of reducing health disparities. We have a series of programs, initiatives, and campaigns. Today, I'll talk primarily about our diversity and clinical trials initiative. I'll provide some more information on some future slides. But also keep in mind that we do have a repository of health education materials that can be used to help make decisions about your health. They're all available online. They can also be printed. They're free of charge, and we can ship them out if you are interested in that. We have fact sheets, we have postcards and brochures, for example. And then we also have digital outreach in the forms of podcasts and public service announcements and other messaging done through social media. In terms of our outreach strategies, we definitely do a lot of work in the community by serving as a spokesperson for FDA and speaking on behalf of the agency on issues that are impacting the communities that I mentioned earlier. Also, we have a newsletter, so if you want to stay up to date with what's going on within the agency, I would recommend that you subscribe to that. It comes out once a quarter. And then we also do other things like host webinars and work within the entire federal government to make sure that minority health is elevated and at the front and center of the conversation. For our consumers that speak English as another language, we have a dedicated program around language access. And essentially what we're aiming to do here is to make sure that we not only translate our materials into other spoken languages other than English, but also making sure that internally we're making this a priority and that we're able to access translation services, and then also making sure that we do have these materials available. So let's talk about FDA's role in clinical trials. So just to be clear, we don't actually run clinical trials, but we are one of the only agency in the world that does primary review of the data from the preclinical stage all the way to the clinical stage. So what that means is that when there is a sponsor who is trying to do a new product, a new medical product, we will actually review that data to make sure that it is safe and effective for the intended population. We also establish regulations and guidances about data in trials for product applications, and then also helping to raise awareness about clinical trials. So the end goal here is to make sure that medical products are safe and effective for people to use. And when we're talking about medical products, we're not only talking about prescription medications, but we're also talking about devices, for example, as well. And keep in mind that clinical trials are one way that we can learn about new medical products, and that most of our work begins after clinical trials are done. So we review the data from the actual trial, but another important role is that we help to raise awareness. So we do have some legislation that governs our work. In particular, the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act of 2012 talks about clinical trials. So since this legislation was enacted, we have been, doing ongoing work around this topic. So in this particular section, it's talking about the inclusion of demographic subgroups in clinical trials and the data analysis for these medical product applications that I mentioned. So of course, we've had reports that have come out to, help further explain, what we're doing around this area and making sure that we have an action plan to actually implement these activities. So within this plan, we had 3 different priorities that were identified. The first one is around quality, and this is really surrounding the quality of the data that we are receiving, making sure that it's complete and representative. And so the way that we do this is that we communicate with industry through guidance documents. So for example, we have a guidance document on the collection of race and ethnicity data in clinical trials. The second priority area is around participation. So we want to look here at what are the actual barriers that are preventing people from enrolling in clinical trials, and what are some of those strategies that we can employ as an agency to overcome some of those barriers. And some of those things that we've identified are holding public meetings so we can make sure that we're educating the public on what clinical trials are, how they can become more engaged, and how they can become educated about the process. And then also developing health education materials and resources to help support that priority. The third priority is around transparency. And again, this goes back to data. So for example, we do have a drug trial snapshot where you're able to see who participated in the trial for that particular drug. Here's a snapshot of a couple of the guidance documents that have gone out, and these are all publicly available, and they really represent FDA's current thinking on that issue, and also help industry to beef up their clinical trials to make sure that race and ethnicity has been adequately addressed. And the reason why this is so important is because we need to consider that there may be differences among different subgroups. So there may be differences in response to different medical products from different race and ethnicity groups, and this information will be relevant in the evaluation of actually the data that we are receiving. So some of the things that we want to keep in mind are disease prevalence, for example. So who actually has the disease? Was that population reflected in the actual clinical trial that we're seeing? Looking at diagnosis and treatment patterns, were previous subgroups included in other studies? So these are all the types of things that we want to think about when looking at the data. So when we're thinking about representation in clinical trials, you can go to Google today and you could probably pull, a ton of different articles from many, many different sources, and you'll start to see a common theme, that there is a lack of representation among racial and ethnic minority groups, and this remains a challenge. So even though this is a challenge, it is a very important topic for us to talk about because we definitely need diverse participation in clinical trials. So we know what the problem is. We know that diverse groups have been historically underrepresented in clinical trials, but if we want to adequately study the effects of medical products, we need the diverse participation because we want the population who is eventually going to use the medical product to actually be included in that trial so we can study the impact of that particular product. And then we also know that minorities may respond differently to medical products, and we want to make sure that we're also putting ourselves in a position where we're able to better understand health disparities. So there are some diseases that more frequently occur among racial and ethnic minority groups, so we want to make sure that those populations are actually represented. So we know that minorities have been underrepresented in clinical trials. Current estimates show for industry-sponsored trials we're at around maybe between 3 to maybe 8%, but if you look at the U.S. population, for example, for African Americans, it's about a little over 12% of the population, and Hispanics represent about 17% of the population. So you can see that there's a little disconnect there between Hispanics and African Americans compared to the actual enrollment in clinical trials. We want to make sure that we have this representation because we want the people who actually have these diseases and conditions that are being studied in the trial are actually in the trial, so we can study if there are any different responses to different medical products. And this will help us better understand health disparities and help us close the disparity gap and making sure that these diseases that more frequently occur in some groups are actually, those groups are actually included in the trial so they can be studied as well. Here's a snapshot of why this is actually important, because there actually have been some FDA-approved products that have specific race and ethnicity information in the actual labeling. So if you look through here, what you'll see is there's some racial and ethnic differences among Blacks, for example, Mediterranean ancestry, Asian patients. So this is why it's very important to make sure that we do have a diverse representation, because there can be some differences. So as I mentioned earlier, I talked about the drug trial snapshot, and that shows exactly who actually participated in the trial for a drug. So I looked at diabetes over the last couple of years, and as you can see across the board, even we know that diabetes disproportionately impacts African Americans, for example, but across the board we see very low representation compared to the other groups that were included in these trials. When you look at the gender differences, they are about equal, with women at around 60% for the different products that are presented here. So we know that there are a lot of different reasons for decreased participation or barriers that may prevent some people from either thinking about joining a clinical trial or getting more information about clinical trials. So we know there's been some historical mistrust and distrust of the medical system due to some historical abuses. And just keep in mind that distrust is really based on a personal experience, and mistrust is more of a general sense of unease towards something, such as like the medical system, for example. There have been challenges with recruitment and retention efforts, for example. Some researchers may not understand different belief systems and how values contribute to decision making among different groups. There's also perceptions about eligibility and people may not being eligible for different clinical trials, or that racial and ethnic minorities just don't want to participate, or the patient themselves may not have enough information to make a decision about it. One thing that we hear a lot is about privacy concerns, but there are protections in place to make sure that this is being monitored. For example, patients who are enrolled in clinical trials, they will definitely get an informed consent document, and this document will help you understand what exactly will happen during the trial, and if you continue on and agree to volunteer, you know, it outlines everything that's going to happen and who's going to be involved in the process. Language barriers have also been an issue as it relates back to informed consent. You always have the option to make sure that someone is available to basically explain the document to you, so language should not be a barrier. In terms of privacy and other concerns about protections, you're able to leave the study at any point in time and any reason, and the studies are always monitored as well. Another barrier that we've heard about is returning a result. Some communities have stated that researchers will come in and study their community, but they never hear back about what actually happened. And then also physicians may not talk to their patients about clinical trials. You know, you're in a very hurried state, you only have a few minutes with each patient, and that may also present another barrier. But in general, what research actually shows is that when asked, most minorities will participate. So there are quite a few studies out here. I pulled a few for this presentation just to show that some of these barriers that I mentioned are becoming less and less of an issue. The real issue is making sure that researchers are actually asking people to participate in clinical trials, and I think asking will help overcome a lot of those other barriers, because that will start the line of communication and patients will be able to ask questions about studies. So the take-home message here is talk to your doctor about joining a clinical trial, seeing if this is right for you and if it's a good fit for you at this particular moment. So over the course of the last few years, my office has been heavily involved in building up health resources and materials to address clinical trial diversity. So one of the things that we've been able to identify is that some of our communications just aren't reaching our intended audiences. So what we've decided to do is take an approach, an equity approach, to make sure that we are meeting people at their place of need and where they feel most comfortable actually accessing health information. One of the things that we know is that racial and ethnic minority populations are actual early adopters of technology. So we wanted to make sure that we were in the digital space as well. And this is why we eventually decided on doing a multimedia campaign to make sure that we are conveying our messages to a variety of audiences. So as I mentioned, we developed a multimedia campaign, and the whole purpose of the campaign was to raise awareness around why we need diverse participation in clinical trials, with the ultimate goal of making sure that medical products are safe and effective for everyone. So one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that we were able to combat some of the myths and provide positive messaging reflecting spokespersons who actually look like the communities that we want to serve. And also to making sure that we were able to stimulate dialogue, not only at the peer-to-peer level. So we want you talking to your family, your friends, your coworkers, et cetera, about clinical trials, but also making sure you're armed with enough information where you can have an honest and open conversation with your provider about clinical trials and if this is the right thing for you. Our Minorities in Clinical Trials campaign has a bunch of different moving pieces. We have about 9 videos so far. They're all available on our YouTube channel. Some are in other languages. We've taken much care to make sure that they are reflective of different audiences, making sure that we're highlighting people who are actually living with conditions that disproportionately impact minorities. We have a webpage that is dedicated to clinical trials, so you can go. It's a one-stop shop where you can get all the information you need about clinical trials, what they are, the type of questions you should ask ask the researcher before you want to join. We have podcasts available, and we also have graphics and social media. And one of the big things is our stakeholder collaboration. We live in this huge universe. So we want to make sure that we're able to connect with those organizations and those groups who are doing similar work to make sure that we're able to amplify our key messages. And of course, we translate all of our materials into other languages. So I think I am going to play one of the videos.
I'm Shirley Miller, and I have sickle cell disease. In order to help researchers find better therapies and treatments for my condition, I have chosen to participate in clinical trials, as well as encouraging my peers to participate. I learned about clinical trials by attending public meetings, talking to my doctor, and visiting clinicaltrials.gov to search for open clinical trials. You too can be a part of the greater good to help advance medical care. Go to clinicaltrials.gov to find out more.
So the next video that we'll play is really talking about getting access to cutting-edge therapies, and that is one reason why some people may want to participate in a clinical trial. And just to note, for these particular videos that we're showing now, they're framed as Shirley's story. So Shirley Miller is actually an African-American woman who is living with sickle cell disease. She's participated in a couple different clinical trials, and she's also served as a patient representative for FDA. So that's just one of the many ways where you as a patient can actually become connected with the agency.
I'm Shirley Miller, and I have sickle cell disease. I have participated in clinical trials as a way to get access to promising cutting-edge therapies and treatments before they come to market. This is an important opportunity to ensure that the benefits and risks are studied in diverse patients like me. With my help, researchers are able to make new medical products available much quicker so that they can help people in our community. To find out if there is a clinical trial that is right for you, visit clinicaltrials.gov.
So the next video talks about the need for healthy volunteers. So not all clinical trials include patients who have a disease or condition. Some are meant to follow healthy patients to answer specific research questions. They may be able to help better understand a particular condition that may be impacted by like your family member, for example, but you may not have that condition.
I'm Shirley Miller, and I have sickle cell disease. I want to encourage you to participate in a clinical trial. Clinical trials are not just for people who have a medical condition. Healthy volunteers are needed too. You should know that your safety is the #1 priority. There are strict guidelines that have to be followed to protect you. Your personal information is safeguarded at all times. You can either study at any time for any reason. For more information, visit clinicaltrials.gov.
So in that video, you can also see that Shirley is highlighting the privacy concerns and the protections that are in place to help make sure that you are protected throughout the entire process. So next, Shirley talks about why diversity is important and why we need diverse participation.
I'm Shirley Miller, and I have sickle cell disease. I want you to know that clinical trials are an important way to help develop new treatments to fight diseases that impact our communities. More minority participation is encouraged in clinical trials to make sure the medical products that come to the market work just as well for us as in other communities. For more information, go to clinicaltrials.gov.
So the next video is actually all in Spanish. So what we learned through our research is that within the Latino community, there was much more of a need to educate about the actual definitions of clinical trials, so making sure that Latinos know exactly what a clinical trial is, that they are research studies, and they help to determine whether medical products are safe and effective for people. And since this one is all in Spanish, I will skip over this one for today, but you can view it on our YouTube channel. And lastly, we had a very unique partnership with the VA, the Veterans Health Administration. We work with their Office of Health Equity to really provide the veterans' perspective, which is oftentimes an overlooked community. So earlier when I was talking about underserved and underrepresented communities, veterans will definitely fall into that category. What we know is that veterans may face unique health challenges, but they are also very important to be included in our clinical trial diversity efforts. I will play one of those videos.
Hi, my name is Cunhado. I was proud to serve my country in the United States Army. Now as a veteran, I continue serving by participating in clinical trials. When we participate in a clinical trial, we're helping to ensure that medical products are safe and effective for all of us. Our participation is important because some medical products work differently between men and women and people of different races and ethnicities. Also, our participation may have scientists identify solutions to the health challenges we face as a result of our military service. Of course, before you decide to enroll, it's important that you understand the risks and benefits involved, and that there are laws to protect us. Our participation is completely voluntary. We all deserve the best possible care, and participating in a clinical trial can help us get closer to achieving that. Remember, serving now is as important as it was then.
So that concludes our series of videos, but I think over all of those different videos, what I hope the take-home message has been is that participation is very important and that we need volunteers from diverse backgrounds. There are many different reasons for participation. You've heard on some of the videos, you know, the being altruistic, making sure that you're benefiting and helping society, find better treatment options for different diseases. So it may not be for you, but it may help someone out in the future. And also really helping researchers to better understand diseases and find better ways to fight diseases, and really understand if there are actually any differences in how diverse groups may respond to a medical product. So what we found out through our campaign is that we've really been able to stimulate dialogue, which is very important for us because we know that's where the real action and where the real change will come in from. We've seen an increase of uptake in our materials. More organizations and more individuals are actually requesting our materials to display at health fairs or within their medical office or practice or within their organization, for example. So we know that the message is getting out there, and the more that we can get the message out, the greater chance of success that we'll have in diversifying clinical trials. So moving forward, we're always looking for innovative strategies to make sure that we're continually advancing the needle and moving in a positive direction. So we're always looking for opportunities to further advance our research portfolios and also developing new multimedia content that may be either patient-driven or may also be physician-driven as well, to make sure that we are providing resources for everyone who will be involved in the clinical trial process. I want to take a moment to highlight some of the other resources that we do have available on our website. Again, they're all free of charge and can be downloaded. In particular, we do have a bunch of different clinical trial resources. We have a fact sheet that really talks about, you know, what are clinical trials, why are they important, why do we need the diversity. We also have a brochure that really speaks to some of the questions that you want to ask if you want to become a research volunteer. So these are some questions that you can ask your medical provider or the researcher who may be conducting the study. So some of those questions are like, you know, how will the study help me? You know, what are the risks? What are the benefits of me participating? What are some of the side effects? You know, is there any financial incentives for you to participate? What are your personal costs that you may have to incur? You know, looking at other options, and also how long the study will last, for example. So those are some of the questions and information you can find within those resources. And then again, on our website, we do have this one-stop shop where you can get all of the resources. Here's a snapshot of some of the resources that we've gone over today. And then as I close out the webinar, before we move into the Q&A portion, I really want to encourage you to start the conversation today. So not only talk to your family members or your friends or your coworkers about clinical trials, also being a source of resource for them as you're learning more about clinical trials. Definitely share the information. We do have materials that can help you facilitate that process as well. And also making sure you're staying up to date on what FDA is doing in this area. So you can follow us on social media, you can visit our website, you can sign up for the listserv as well. And all of those tools will make you stay more informed, so then you're empowered to make better decisions about your health. And then lastly, I would say, get engaged and get involved. You know, we want to hear what you have to say. So making sure that if at all possible, you're able to come to some of the public meetings or respond to some of the public requests for information that are put out there. If you're interested in being a patient representative on some of the committees that FDA has, you can reach out to me and I can make sure you get connected to the right person within the agency. But we really want you to get engaged, making sure you're staying up to date with all new information. And lastly, just making sure that you're actually having the conversation about clinical trials and why it matters. There's an opportunity to connect with us. And I think we will open it up for questions.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Jovonni, for joining us and for leading such an excellent webinar. At this time, I'd like to ask you to answer a few of the questions we received from the audience over the course of the webinar. And as a reminder to the audience, if you do have a question, please type it into the section of your control panel titled Questions. So our first question is, what clinical trials are available to kidney disease patients?
So excellent question. So for that person, I would recommend you do a couple of different things. You can visit clinicaltrials.gov. That is a database that has all of the information around all of the trials with around kidney disease. And I also know that other organizations, including the American Kidney Fund, do actually have their own databases that can help you filter through this information and find out what trials may be right for you.
Great. So our next question is, can people over the age of 60 participate in clinical trials?
The short answer is yes, they can participate in clinical trials, but keep in mind that each clinical trial has its own protocol and has its own set of inclusion and exclusion criteria. So it would be very important for you to talk to the researcher and talk to your medical provider and see if you are able to participate in whatever trial that you are most interested in.
Great. Is it possible to participate in more than one clinical trial?
Yes.
Okay, great. And where can people find clinical trials?
The best way is through clinicaltrials.gov. And we actually hosted a webinar a few years ago, which you can find on our website, that helps explain how to navigate through clinicaltrials.gov, because there is a lot of information there. So we wanted to make sure that that was another resource that we were able to offer.
Great. Well, thank you for pointing us toward that. So earlier you had gone through some of the questions that someone could ask ahead of joining a clinical trial. Could you go through some of those again?
Sure. So some of the questions that you as a patient may want to ask your medical team include, okay, so what is the purpose of this study? So what research question are they actually trying to answer? And does it align with you? And are you eligible to help them answer that question? You should also ask questions about the protocol. So what's going to happen to you throughout the study? All the information should be gone over with you through the informed consent process. So that's your opportunity to continue to ask questions. You may want to know how long the study will last. Is this going to be a study for 1 year or 10 years? You know, you want to know what your commitment is going to be, how many visits that you're going to be expected. Can some of this be done virtually, or do you always have to show up to the site, for example? Costs are a big factor for people. You know, what costs would you have to incur? If you're in another state and you have to travel, you know, you have to think about those things. For example, financial incentives, you know, will you be compensated for being in that research study? And then also looking at what are all of your options to consider. So between you and your medical care team, you can figure out, you know, based on the information you received, is this right for you? And then you should definitely always ask about the risk and the benefits to see if this is something that you will personally want to do.
Thank you for that explanation. So somebody else asked, I'm interested in joining a clinical trial, but I want to know, what does participation look like?
Oh, that is a great question. So participation in a clinical trial, one thing you need to be aware of is what your team will look like. So who's on the team? So that may include doctors, nurses, aides, social workers, other healthcare providers, the researchers, the investigators. So all of these people can possibly make up your team of people who will be guiding you through the process of the clinical trial. You know, during the clinical trial, depending on what they're looking for, they may do different tests or exams to help answer the study-related questions, and they can share those results with you after they are completed. And also knowing where trials actually take place. So some may be done at hospitals, some may be done at research centers, or may be done at other locations, for example. And then you also, you know, you may be asked to do some things outside of the study. So you may be asked to do some tasks at home, like doing some journals. There's a lot of technology out here nowadays. So you may be asked, you know, to track different measures in between your visits or your interactions with the study team.
All right, well, thank you for that answer. So our next question is, you know, why should I join a clinical trial?
So there are many, many different reasons why people choose to join a clinical trial. The one that I hear the most is being altruistic. So people really want to make sure that, you know, they're adding a benefit to society. So even if this trial may not help you at this present moment or time, it may help future people who come after you. Joining the clinical trial may also be a good choice if you and your doctor believe that your current treatment options aren't good, that they may not be working as well for you, and that the clinical trial may offer an additional alternative. Or you want to, simply just help researchers find better ways to fight diseases. And again, I want to stress the importance of not all trials are for people with diseases and conditions. There are trials that want healthy volunteers to participate.
That's well put. Thank you. So our next question is, I'm just one person, so why is my participation in a clinical trial important?
That's very, very good. So even though you are one person, you are a part of the larger society. So one person can turn into 2 people, can turn into 5, can turn into 30 people. And then once we have this collective group of people, we're able to answer some really amazing questions. Participation is important because we need volunteers from diverse populations. Again, you're helping to benefit society by helping researchers find better treatments for not only you, but for others in the future. And then finding better ways to fight diseases and, seeing if there are, if people process medical products in different ways or have different responses to a medical product. So even though you are just one person, your one person makes a world of difference.
That's a great answer. So another question that we have is about privacy. So this person says, I'm interested in joining a clinical trial, but I'm worried about my personal data getting out there. How will I be protected during a clinical trial?
I can definitely see why that is a major concern. But throughout the entire clinical trial, your study records are private and they are also confidential. So the research team, your doctor, or anyone else who is involved in the trial, those are the only people who are going to have access to your medical records. And so that information will not be shared outside of that, those who actually need the information to conduct the study.
Great, that's very good to know. So somebody else asked, so what exactly is a clinical trial? And this might be a good opportunity just to talk about the other ways that clinical trials are referred to.
Okay, so at its most simplistic view, clinical trials are basically research studies that determine whether a medical product, and that can include medicines, vaccines, or devices, are safe and effective for people. You may have heard clinical trials referred to by different names, so maybe clinical research, maybe using the term studies or the term research or trials alone or clinical study. So you may be hearing a lot of different terminology to refer to what a clinical trial is. And so within the clinical trial, researchers are really trying to answer some very specific questions for each trial. They may be looking at things on how to actually develop a new treatment. They may be looking to identify, what are the causes of a particular illness. They may be studying trends of a disease or illness and how it progresses over time. And they may also look at genetics and how genetics could be related to an illness.
Great. Someone else asked, are there clinical trials for people who have had kidney transplants, not just people with kidney disease?
Yes.
Great. So, if you have kidney disease or a kidney transplant, there could be a trial available for you. Just depends on the eligibility criteria of the trial. All right. Well, we are going to wrap up. So thank you once again, Jovonni, and this concludes today's webinar. Our next webinar will be about pain management and kidney disease. The webinar will be held next week on Thursday, September 19th, and hosted by Dr. Randy Chen. Registration is now open. Visit kidneyfund.org/webinars for more information and to register. When the webinar closes, please do not close your browser window. You may see a pop-up saying that the webinar has ended. Please close that pop-up and proceed to the webinar evaluation survey. Your honest feedback will help us make our webinar program the best it can be. Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you again.